I'm sick and tired of black leaders, activists, and representatives running to the podium to scream Black Lives Matter and stick their hands out asking for donations whenever a white person kills a black person, but are dead silent whenever a black person kills another black person, which happens far more often and at a far higher rate than any other intraracial violence in the country. This is cherry-picked and performative outrage. Look, here's a tough pill for a lot of folks to swallow and something you won't see a lot of our supposed black leaders talk about. Today, homicide is the leading cause of death among young black men. Black homicide rates are 7 to 8 times higher than white homicide rates, even though the poverty rate for blacks is only 4 to 5 times higher. And here's an even bigger pill. In about 80 to 90% of black homicide cases, the black victim was killed by another black person, and about 52% of the murder victims were acquainted with their killer. And before you even try to check me on my sources and say this is misinformation, these statistics were pulled straight from the Department of Justice. Now take a moment to ask yourself, why don't we hear these numbers more often, and why is it that the majority of those listening to this video right now have never heard these statistics before? Ask yourself, is this by coincidence or by design? These so-called and self-proclaimed black leaders are frauds. They're race hustlers, they're opportunistic con men and false prophets, and they promote nothing but division between whites and blacks, and they work tirelessly to reinforce the victim mentality within the black community through instilling fear in their own people, all for control. Now, a comment I get time and time again is that poverty is the primary or sole cause of the extreme violence within the black community, which is one of the most popular and simultaneously one of the most ridiculous takes out there on the topic. The reason this take is so popular though is because it alleviates the black community of all accountability, because then we can all turn around and pin it all back on the white man without any need to engage in any actual self-reflection whatsoever. But here's why that argument is simply insufficient though. Though poverty is one of many factors, poverty as an isolated factor is not the primary cause of violent crime. For example, according to researchers at Columbia University, despite there being more impoverished Asian people in New York City than there are impoverished black people, Asian people committed significantly less violent crime. 23% of the Asian community in New York City are impoverished. 19% of the black community in New York City are impoverished. But as you can see, the numbers for murder, robbery, and assault are not just a little, but far higher for the black community, who is technically less impoverished. At 1.2 per 100,000, Asian murder arrest rates were nearly 1/9 of black rates. If poverty were the principal cause of crime, we would expect Asian rates to be as high, if not higher than those of black rates, which clearly they are not. The truth is, the relationship between poverty and crime is far too complex and multifaceted to just outright say that poverty directly results in crime. And so to say that the rampant crime in our black communities is a direct result of poverty is simply and statistically untrue. Now, a popular counterpoint to statistics like these are that these disparities exist because of over-policing, but there's a fine line between over-policing and reflective policing. According to the National Crime Victimization Survey, black victims report violent crimes at a rate of approximately 54%, compared to the 46% for white victims. This indicates that crime in black communities is not just a result of police focus, but is a real issue acknowledged by the victims themselves, these victims oftentimes being black people. And according to the FBI Uniform Crime Report, arrest rates for violent crimes in black communities align closely with crime reporting rates from within these same communities. So this suggests that higher black crime statistics are not artificially inflated by over-policing, but reflect genuine incidents reported by victims. So to pin the absurd rates of violent crime within the black community all on poverty, or insinuate that the numbers are all inflated due to over-policing, is clearly foolish, as it's easily disproved in so many ways, even beyond the numbers and reports I just went over. And there are so many more examples I could actually present to you, but we just don't have all day for that. Now, this isn't to say that there is zero level of racism at play within our government or justice system, nor is it to deny the long history of discrimination and racism within our country, but false narratives are being painted and important details are being left out of the conversation, all in order to instill fear within the black community, because fear is control. Sometimes I get people in the comments saying things like, well, this is all because of slavery. We're all in this position because we were all slaves, but not all black Americans today have direct ancestral ties to slavery. According to a Pew Research Center study, about 54% of black adults reported that their ancestors were enslaved, indicating that nearly half do not have direct ancestral ties to slavery. So the slavery argument wouldn't even apply to about half of the black population. So what exactly would your next excuse be? Let me guess, it'd be, oh, well, it's all because of systemic oppression, right? Well, if systemic oppression were the sole factor influencing crime rates, one would expect Caribbean and African immigrants to have similar crime rates as African Americans. However, studies have shown that first-generation black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean actually have lower crime rates compared to native-born African Americans, despite facing the same racial discrimination. And honestly, I would argue that the racial discrimination they face is actually worse. Injustice plays a role, yes, of course, but to solely cherry-pick and highlight things like systemic oppression and totally ignore things like community structure, cultural values, and individual accountability is dangerous and dishonest. All of these things are factors, not just one or the other. See, race hustlers love to ignore these other factors and rely on emotional fuel and ignorance to brainwash you into believing false narratives in order to swindle you. Let's talk about something I find to be way more relevant to the rates of violent crime we see within our Black communities, and an issue that no other racial group in our country suffers from to the same degree that our Black population does. An issue that's conveniently left out oftentimes when discussing the rampant crime within the Black community, as we're pretending it's all about poverty. Let's talk about single parent households. Alright, so right now we're looking at children in single parent families by race and ethnicity in the United States. And pay attention to these highlighted brackets right here, because I feel they're the most important. Look at these massive disparities between Black and everything else. This is clearly a massive issue. I mean, look at the disparity between Black and Asian alone. We're talking 67% to 16%. That is a massive disparity. I mean, this is a serious problem that more people need to be talking about. So I remember back in college when one of my professors discussed racial disparities in our prison populations, and I will never forget it. She said that because Black people make up about 40% of inmates despite making up only 13% of our population, racism is to blame for the disparity. She just chalked it all up to the justice system being racist, which I have no doubt it is to some degree, but to say that the disparity exists solely due to racism is totally untrue. So I took it upon myself to ask her if she thinks the fact that almost 70% of Black people growing up in single parent households has anything to do with the disparities we see in the prison population. And I shit you not, she said, I don't see why that's relevant. Mind you, this was a woman who was hired at a prestigious university to teach this exact topic, spewing a false narrative and conveniently leaving out critical details. So let's explain why exactly this is relevant. Alright, so first let's look at this article here. It says fatherless children are more likely to suffer from psychological development issues, live in poverty, drop out of school, engage in school violence, abuse substances, and enter the juvenile justice system. And read some of these stats here. So it says in a study of 75 juvenile delinquents, 66% experienced fatherlessness, 20% have never lived with their father, and 25% had an alcoholic father. See here, it has been reported that fatherless children are anywhere from 3 to 20 times more likely to be incarcerated than children raised in dual parent households. And you can pause the video and read some of these on your own, but I mean, even here it says some data suggests that 72% of adolescent murders and 70% of long-term prison inmates come from fatherless homes. But yeah, so this is a very interesting article you can check out and read some of these other ones, and let's move on to the next. So in this article here, it says statistics on fatherlessness in America and the profound impact of mentoring. And we can read some of these stats right here. So what do these say? 85% of youths in prison come from fatherless homes. 71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. Nearly 25 million children live without their biological father. 60% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes. And according to a 2023 report by the Institute for Family Studies, research indicates that neighborhoods with many single-parent families have 137% higher total crime rates, 226% higher violent crime rates, and 436% higher homicide rates compared to areas with fewer single-parent households. And according to the Heritage Foundation, a study analyzing data from 11,000 individuals found that the percentage of single-parent households with children aged 12 to 20 is significantly associated with higher rates of violent crime and burglary. So my question is, how is it not relevant, and why are we acting like it isn't? Now let's talk about something else I feel is a relevant factor to the numbers we're seeing: art and cultural values. Now, it is clear that different cultures have different values, and these values are often captured within the art of a culture. And art is the best way to learn about a culture because it serves as a direct window into a society's beliefs, values, stories, history, etc. When we stumble across ancient ruins, the first thing we analyze to understand the society that once inhabited that area is their art. Art is an artifact. If somebody wished to listen to the most popular rap songs amongst Black Americans, in most of those songs, they'd hear Black people rapping about murder, drugs, gang activity, promiscuity, materialism, etc. And all of these themes are consistent with the same issues that plague many Black American communities as well. Really, it's reflective, and I'd argue that it's the #1 most influential thing, not just on the Black community, but especially on the Black youth. Now, this isn't me saying that it's the most influential factor on the rampant crime, because I don't believe that's the case at all, but just look at the level of praise and influence hip-hop artists have within our Black communities. This certainly has an impact in some way. I mean, people wish to mimic and follow the paths of those who receive the most praise within their communities. communities. And if those people are glorified criminals and gangster rappers, naturally there will be those who follow in their footsteps, especially since they may come from similar backgrounds, cities, areas, and may even look like them. I mean, just look back at how influential some rappers and rap groups were back in their primes. NWA, 50 Cent, Biggie, Run DMC, Rakim, Tupac, even after his death. Look at the influence. I mean, folks were treating Jay-Z like he was God before the Diddy shit came out, and many still do. And for people my age range, you could look at the influence of rappers like Chief Keef and the whole Chicago drill phase, Playboi Carti, Nicki Minaj, Lil Wayne, X and the whole SoundCloud rapper phase, Future, Tyler the Creator, etc. You'd be lying to yourself if you said these people have had no impact or influence on the culture and many of the people within it to some degree. Look, I was still in school when all these dudes were up, and everybody and their mother was trying to dress like them, talk like them, act like them. I mean, you can't tell me rappers don't have a direct influence on the actions and behaviors of the black community. Bro, I'm telling you, during the whole Chicago drill phase, I have never seen so many fights in school. I live in the DMV, and we had folks fighting over blocks that were located in Chicago. Bro, I'm telling you, I bet you they couldn't even find Chicago on a map. Look, music speaks straight to the soul, and there's actually been tons of studies that have analyzed music's influence on our worldviews, personal identities, actions and behaviors, feelings and emotions, and even our spending habits, among many other things. While CNN discusses how music can influence various aspects of our lives, including health, depression, spending, productivity, and our perception of the world. And it talks about the significant impact music has on our emotions and behaviors, and this includes aggressive behaviors. This article by Save the Music examines how music has shaped cultures and societies around the world, altering moods, changing perceptions, and inspiring change. It gets into the profound impact of music on societal norms and individual behaviors. There are tons of different studies and articles on the profound impact music and art has on people, and I feel as long as we are blaring songs full of violence in our communities and championing the artists who make these songs and electing them as speakers and leaders of our communities and people, we are doomed. And just for the sake of comparison, when we look at the dominating genres of music within different Asian countries and cultures, none of them really revolve around such harmful, morbid, and degenerate themes. I mean, they're not propping up glorified criminals as leaders and speakers of their own people either, which would have made somebody like Malcolm X turn in his grave. I'll get people in here saying things like, oh, but what about death metal? There are predominantly white genres out there that revolve around violence too, but according to statistics, hip-hop and rap have the highest homicide rates out of any other genre by a landslide, and it's not even remotely close. And I know I'll get people asking why I constantly look to different Asian cultures as examples for comparisons, and well, it's because Asian communities thrive in many places that black communities don't in our country, and I think some of their cultural values should be incorporated within our own communities. Now, this isn't to say those cultures or communities are perfect by any means though, because no culture or community is, but I think they're succeeding in some very notable areas, especially despite the fact that they're also minorities that have historically faced discrimination and still do. A few big notable differences I found in some of their cultural values is that education and family structure are prioritized heavily. Asian students on average spend more time studying and doing homework than white students, black students, and Hispanic students, and they also typically score higher grades. They also have the least amount of single-parent households in our country. To completely ignore these factors and act like there's nothing to take away from their differences in cultural values is downright stupid. Also, to act like these sharp cultural contrasts have zero impact on their low crime rates is downright stupid as well. If you are black and you are watching this, I want you to know that these race hustlers, false prophets, and fraud leaders are not your allies. The white race is not your enemy, and holding a deep hatred and resentment towards all white people will not get you far in life. About 75% of the country is white. That is the vast majority. You cannot be at war with the vast majority of the population and expect to make it far, and harboring the mentality that they're all out to get you or that they're all out to victimize you in some way is not only unhealthy, but it will undoubtedly serve as a direct hindrance to your chances at success. And anybody that tells you otherwise lives in fear. Worst case, they're convincing you so out of malicious intent because they want you to remain victimized. They want you to remain weak so they can take advantage of you. A person who is weak and fearful is far easier to take advantage of than one who is strong and resilient. There's a reason these race hustlers constantly reinforce the victim mentality within the black community. There's a reason they want racial division and tension. How often do they preach for unity? How often do they tell you that it's your own community tearing itself down? They want you afraid, blinded, and obedient. This is how they control you.